The desert sun had just begun its descent over Camp Leviathan when I received a letter. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun, that's me, was finishing up a routine patrol briefing when Lieutenant Rodriguez approached with a manila envelope marked Urgent, Family Matter. My hands were still dusty from the convoy exercise, leaving smudged fingerprints on the pristine paper as I tore it open. Inside was a letter from my father's attorney, dated 3 weeks prior. 3 weeks. The word swam before my eyes. Regret to inform you of the passing of Harold Chun. Estate proceedings, presence requested but not required. I had to read it 4 times before the reality sank in. Dad was gone and I hadn't been there. We hadn't spoken in 6 months, not since our last argument before my deployment. He'd wanted me to stay, to help run the family construction business that had been his life's work. Your brother needs you here, he'd said, his weathered face creased with disappointment. David can't handle this alone. But I'd already signed my re-enlistment papers. The military wasn't just a job for me. It was my identity, my purpose. Dad never understood that. I requested emergency leave immediately, but the bureaucratic wheels of the military grind slowly, even in grief. It took another week to process the paperwork, arrange transport back to the States, and navigate the maze of connecting flights from Kuwait to Colorado. By the time I landed in Denver, Dad had been gone for nearly a month, and according to the attorney's follow-up email, though a reading had been scheduled for that afternoon, the flight home was a blur of fitful sleep and memories I tried to bury. Dad teaching me to use a level when I was 8, his patient hands guiding mine, the pride in his eyes when I graduated high school at the top of my class, the hurt I pretended not to see when I enlisted instead of joining Chun and Son's construction. My brother David had always been there, dependable, steady, everything Dad wanted in a son. While I chased my dreams across the world, David had stayed, working alongside Dad 6 days a week, learning the business from foundation to finish. I arrived at Blackwood and Associates law firm at 2:47 p.m., still wearing my travel clothes, but carrying my dress uniform in a garment bag. The receptionist's eyes widened when I walked in. "You must be Marcus," she said softly. "They're waiting for you in conference room B. Take your time." Her sympathy felt heavy, suffocating. The conference room door was closed. Through the frosted glass, I could see silhouettes. David's broad shoulders unmistakable even in shadow, and several others I couldn't identify. I paused in the restroom, splashing cold water on my face, staring at the stranger in the mirror. 32 years old, with lines around my eyes that hadn't been there when I'd left for my first tour. 3 deployments had aged me in ways that had nothing to do with years. I changed into my dress uniform, each movement automatic from years of practice. The medals on my chest caught the fluorescent light. The Bronze Star, the Purple Heart from the IED blast in Kandahar, the Afghanistan and Iraq campaign medals. Dad had never seen me wear most of these. I'd earned them in a world he couldn't understand, fighting battles he'd never approved of. When I finally opened the conference room door, the conversation died mid-sentence. David sat at the head of the table, looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit. Next to him was his wife Jennifer and their 2 kids. Uncle Robert was there too, Dad's younger brother, along with Aunt Margaret and my cousin Sophie. On the other side of the table sat Mr. Blackwood, the attorney, an older gentleman with silver hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. "Marcus," David said, standing. His expression was unreadable. "You made it." "Sorry I'm late," I replied, my voice rougher than I'd intended. Military transport isn't known for its punctuality. The room remained silent as I took the empty seat at the far end of the table, as far from David as possible. Mr. Blackwood cleared his throat, shuffling papers. "Well, now that everyone's present, we can begin. Shall we proceed with the reading of Harold Chen's last will and testament? Chapter 2, The Will." Mr. Blackwood adjusted his reading glasses and opened the folder before him with practiced solemnity. The leather of my chair creaked as I shifted, hyper-aware of every sound in the suddenly airless room. Outside, traffic hummed along downtown Denver streets, oblivious to the small drama unfolding in this mahogany-paneled space. The last will and testament of Harold James Chun, executed on March 15th of this year. Mr. Blackwood began. My breath caught. March 15th. That was only 2 months before Dad died, and just a month after our last phone call, the one where I told him I was extending my deployment by another 6 months. The attorney continued through the standard legal preamble, words that meant nothing and everything simultaneously. I watched David across the table. He sat perfectly still, hands folded on the polished surface, but I caught the slight tick in his jaw, the way his thumb rubbed against his wedding ring. He'd always done that when he was nervous. To my beloved son David, Mr. Blackwood read, who has stood by my side these 20 years, who learned the business from the ground up, who sacrificed his own dreams to build Chun and Sons into what it is today. I leave the entirety of my construction company, including all assets, contracts, equipment, and the commercial property at 3847 Industrial Boulevard. I felt the words land like physical blows. Of course, Dad would leave the company to David. That made perfect sense. David had earned it, spending countless hours on job sites in the office, managing crews and clients while I was halfway around the world. I had no claim to it, wanted no claim to it. So why did it hurt so much? Mr. Blackwood continued without pause. Additionally, I leave to David the family home at 1543 Maple Street, where he and Jennifer have helped maintain and care for me these last years. The house, our childhood home, where Mom's rose garden still bloomed every spring, where I'd carved my initials into the oak tree in the backyard, where every room held memories that felt more vivid than the present moment. Jennifer reached over and squeezed David's hand. Uncle Robert nodded approvingly. This was expected. I reminded myself. This was fair. David had been there. David had cared for Dad through his cancer treatments, through the chemo that had stolen his strength and left him a shadow of the robust man he'd once been. Where had I been? Kabul, Baghdad, places whose names Dad could barely pronounce. To my son Marcus, the attorney continued, and my attention snapped back, I leave the sum of $5,000 to be held in trust for his use upon his return from military service. The room seemed to tilt. $5,000. That was it. Not the cabin in Estes Park, where we'd spent summers fishing. Not Dad's vintage truck that he'd restore with me when I was 16. Not even his tools, the ones he'd always said he'd pass down to both his sons. $5,000, like a tip, like a polite acknowledgement of my existence. I make this division, Mr. Blackwood read on, his voice carefully neutral. Not out of lack of love for Marcus, but in recognition of David's dedication to the family and business. Marcus has chosen his own path, and I respect that choice, but the fruits of my labor must go to the son who helped cultivate them. Chosen my own path. The words echoed in my skull, as if serving my country was just some hobby, some phase I'd gone through, as if the scars on my back from the blast, the hearing loss in my left ear, the nightmares that still woke me in cold sweats, as if all of that was just me being selfish. The attorney continued with smaller bequests. Uncle Robert received Dad's fishing gear. Aunt Margaret got Mom's jewelry collection. Sophie inherited the antique china cabinet. Each item was a piece of our family history, distributed like playing cards, and I'd been dealt the worst hand. When Mr. Blackwood finally closed the folder, the silence was deafening. David wouldn't meet my eyes. Jennifer looked uncomfortable, her gaze fixed on the table. Uncle Robert was the first to speak. Well, Harold was always practical. He did what made sense of the business. Practical. I repeated, tasting the word. It was bitter. David finally looked up. Mark, we should talk about this. What's there to talk about? I stood, the chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that made Jennifer's kids flinch. Dad made his wishes clear. You stayed. You get everything. I left. I get a check. Simple math. That's not fair, David said, rising too. You don't understand the whole situation. I understand perfectly. My voice was steady. Years of military discipline, keeping the rage locked down. I understand that choosing to serve my country made me less a son in Dad's eyes. I understand that I'm worth less than commercial real estate and construction equipment. I understand just fine. Mr. Blackwood stood as well, his expression pained. "Mr. Chun, Marcus, there are procedures for contesting a will, if you feel." "I'm not contesting anything." I cut him off. "My father made his choice. I'll make mine." I grabbed my cover from the table and headed for the door. Behind me, David called my name, but I didn't stop. The hallway outside seemed to stretch forever, my boots echoing against the tile. The receptionist started to say something, but I was already past her, pushing through the glass doors into the Colorado afternoon. The sun was too bright, the air too thin. I stood on the sidewalk, military straight despite wanting to collapse, and pulled out my phone. There was a number I'd saved months ago, never thinking I'd actually use it. Captain Morrison, my commander, had given it to me on my last day before leave. "If you need to come back early," he'd said, "call any time." My thumb hovered over the contact. It would be so easy. Request to cut my leave short. Return to base where everything made sense, where your value was measured in skill and dedication, not in whose dreams you fulfilled. Where brothers meant the soldiers beside you in the fight, not the people who shared your blood but couldn't understand your choices. "Marcus, wait." David's voice carried from the building entrance. He was jogging toward me, loosening his tie like it was choking him. "Please, just wait." I turned, and for a moment, we just stared at each other across the distance of years and choices and words unsaid. My brother, the stranger who'd inherited my father's world while I'd been building my own. "What do you want, David?" I asked, exhausted suddenly, feeling every one of the 37 hours I'd been traveling. "Come to the house," he said. "Tonight, let's talk about this like family." "Family," I echoed. "Is that what we are?" His face fell, and I saw genuine pain there. "Please, Mark, there are things you don't know. Things Dad wanted." He stopped, looked around at the people passing by on the sidewalk. "Just come. 7 o'clock. We'll explain everything." Before I could respond, he was heading back inside, leaving me alone with my anger and confusion, and the bitter taste of rejection that no amount of military honors could sweeten. I spent the intervening hours driving aimlessly through Denver, watching the city I'd grown up and transformed before my eyes. New developments sprawled where empty lots used to be. The old diner where Dad took us for pancakes every Sunday was now a trendy coffee shop, with a line out the door. Even the Army recruiting station where I'd first enlisted had relocated, replaced by a yoga studio with floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything changes, I thought, except me. I'm still the same kid who disappointed his father. I considered not showing up at the house. I could find a hotel, sleep for the first time in days, and fly back to base in the morning. The $5,000 would clear eventually, enough to cover some bills, and maybe a decent vacation I'd never take. I could cut my losses, except that David had the family and I had the service, and we'd just be Christmas card relatives from now on, if that. But curiosity pulled at me, or maybe it was masochism. "Things you don't know," David had said. "What could possibly make this better? What explanation could justify it being written out of your own family history?" At 6:55 p.m., I pulled up to 1543 Maple Street. The house looked smaller than I remembered, but well-maintained. David had replaced the old porch, added gutters, repainted in a soft gray that Mom would have loved. The garden was immaculate, the lawn perfectly edged. It looked like a home in a way it never quite had when Dad lived alone after Mom passed. Jennifer answered the door, her smile tentative. "Marcus, come in. The kids are at my mom's, so we can talk freely." She hesitated, then pulled me into a brief hug that I barely returned. "I'm glad you came." The interior was familiar yet foreign. Same layout, different furniture. Pictures on the walls showed David's family, vacations, school photos, Jennifer's extended family at holidays. There were a few photos of Dad, including one for his 70th birthday last year, looking gaunt but smiling, flanked by David's kids. I wasn't in any of the photos, except for one, my high school graduation, tucked in a corner near the kitchen, Dad's arm around my shoulders, both of us squinting into the sun. David emerged from the kitchen, carrying 3 beers. He'd changed into jeans and a flannel shirt, looking more like the brother I remembered. Figure we could all use one of these, he said, offering me a bottle. We settled in the living room, an awkward triangle with too much space between us. David and Jennifer on the couch, me in the armchair that used to be Dad's. No one spoke for a long moment. The tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, counting off the seconds. Finally, David set down his beer with a decisive thunk. That reading was bullshit, he said flatly. I blinked. What? Not the legal part. That was all legitimate. But the way it was presented, out of context, without explanation, that was bullshit, and I should have stopped it. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture so much like Dad it made my chest ache. Mark, Dad was dying. The cancer had spread to his brain by the end. He wasn't thinking clearly. He seemed clear enough when he wrote me out of his life. I said, taking a long pull from the beer. He didn't write you out. Jennifer interjected gently. That's what David's trying to explain. David leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Dad rewrote his will 4 times in the last year. 4 times, Mark. The first version split everything evenly between us. The second left you the business and gave me the house. The third left me the business but gave you all his personal items and half the value of the house. The fourth, the final one, that's what you heard today. And I press, not understanding where this was going. And that last version was written when Dad was on a new medication regimen that messed with his cognition. His oncologist noted in his records that he was experiencing confusion, paranoia, and altered judgment. David pulled out a folder from the side table, opened it to show medical records. Look at the dates. The will was written 2 days after they doubled his steroid dose. I stared at the papers, but the medical jargon swam before my eyes. Why didn't his attorney question it? Because Dad seemed lucid when he signed it. He passed all the basic tests. But Mr. Blackwood didn't know him like we did. Didn't know that the things he was saying about you choosing your own path, about the business needing to stay with a dedicated son. Those were things he said when he was scared and angry, not when he was himself. Jennifer added, the last good conversation David had with your father, about 2 weeks before the end, he was crying Marcus, saying he'd failed you, that he'd pushed you away, that he wished he'd told you how proud he was. The words hit harder than I expected. Proud? He never. He carried every news article about your unit. David interrupted, standing to pull down a box from the bookshelf. He dumped the contents on the coffee table. Newspaper clippings, printed internet articles, photos clearly taken from military websites. My unit's commendation in stars and stripes. A piece about the school we'd helped rebuild in Kabul. Another about the humanitarian mission in Iraq. All carefully cut out, collected, saved. He had a subscription to Military Times. Jennifer said softly, he made David teach him how to use Facebook so he could follow military family groups. He didn't understand what you did, Marcus, but he tried. He really tried. I picked up one of the clippings, an article about IED detection training, and saw notes in Dad's handwriting in the margin. M's unit, with an arrow pointing to a photo that did indeed include my squad. Why didn't he tell me? My voice cracked. Why didn't he just say? Because he was Harold Chun, David said with a sad smile. Stubborn, proud, bad at expressing feelings, and convinced that real love meant letting you find your own way even if it killed him to watch you go. He wanted to come to your Bronze Star ceremony, Jennifer added. He had the dates circled on his calendar. But he was in the middle of chemo, and the doctors wouldn't clear him to fly. I remembered that ceremony, standing at attention while the medal was pinned to my chest, scanning the crowd for a face I knew wouldn't be there, telling myself I didn't care. He never said, because you never called, David replied, and though his tone wasn't accusatory, the truth of it stung. You'd check in with me every few months, ask about the business, but you never asked about Dad directly, and he took that as confirmation that you didn't want him in your military life. I thought he didn't want to know. I admitted. He made it clear when I enlisted that he saw it as a rejection of him, of the family business. He did at first, David acknowledged, but people change, Mark. He changed. The cancer gave him perspective. By the end, All he wanted was to make things right with you, but he didn't know how. And then the medications messed with his head, and he wrote that damn will. I sat back, trying to process everything. The box of clippings sat on the table between us. Evidence of a love I'd never known existed. So what we do now, the will is legal. You said so yourself. David exchanged a look with Jennifer, something passing between them that spoke of previous conversations. Decisions already made. We follow the letter of the will, David said finally, because that's what's legal. But we don't follow the spirit of it, because that's not what Dad really wanted. I don't understand. The business is mine legally, but it should be half yours morally. The house is mine legally, but it's full of memories that belong to both of us. David took a deep breath. I'm proposing we split Dad's estate the way he originally intended, down the middle. I shook my head immediately. I can't accept that. I earned a paycheck working for Dad. David cut me off. You earned medals defending the country. Different contributions to different things, both valuable. Don't diminish what you've done, Mark. But the business is worth more than it's ever been, thanks to the work Dad and I put in, yes. But it's also worth more because Dad never had to pay to replace the equipment we would have lost if not for the military contracts you helped us secure. Remember when you connected us with that procurement officer at Fort Carson? That contract alone kept us afloat during the recession. I'd forgotten about that. 3 years ago, mentioning Dad's company to a supply officer who needed local contractors. It had seemed like a small gesture at the time. The house is fully paid off, Jennifer added. We've been living here rent-free for 4 years, while David worked for a fraction of what he could have made elsewhere, if we sell it and split the proceeds. No, I said firmly. You have kids. You've made this your home. I don't want the house. Then we'll keep the house, David said, and compensate you from the business assets. Or you take a percentage ownership in Chan and Sons. Or we set up a trust. There are options, Mark. The point is we're family and we do this right. Why? I asked the question raw. Why would you give up what's legally yours? David's eyes were bright, with unshed tears. Because Dad made a mistake at the end, and I won't compound it by taking advantage of that mistake. Because you're my brother, and I've missed you. Because life's too short, and I've seen what happens when families let money destroy them. Because it's the right thing to do, and you taught me that. I taught you. You enlisted against Dad's wishes because you believe in something bigger than yourself, David said. You deployed again and again because you felt it was your duty, consequences be damned. You've lived your whole adult life according to principles I admired but couldn't match. The least I can do is act with integrity now. The clock ticked. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked. Jennifer wiped her eyes, not bothering to hide her tears. And I felt something crack open inside me, something that had been frozen since I'd read that letter in the desert. I don't want your money, I said finally, but I want. I struggled to find the words. I want to know about Dad, the parts one missed. I want to understand who he became after I left. Then stay, Jennifer said simply. You have 3 weeks of leave, right? Stay here. Go through Dad's things with David. Let's tell you the stories. Let's be family again. I can't stay here, I protested. This is your home. It's your home, too, David said. Your room is exactly as you left it. We haven't touched it, except the dust. It's been waiting for you. The offer hung in the air between us, fragile as spun glass. I thought about the hotel room I'd planned to book, the early flight back to base I'd nearly arranged. I thought about Dad's box of clippings, evidence of pride he'd never expressed. I thought about the will that wasn't really his will, and the brother who was trying to make things right. Okay, I heard myself say, I'll stay. My old room was a time capsule. Posters of bands I'd listened to in high school still hung on the walls. My bookshelf held science fiction novels and military history books with cracked spines. The desk where I'd studied for the ASFOB and written my enlistment essays sat beneath the window, dust motes dancing in the late evening light. On the dresser, my old baseball trophies gathered dust next to a photo of Mom, taken a year before she died. Jennifer had put fresh sheets on the bed, and left a stack of clean towels. "Bathroom's all yours tonight," she'd said. "We're exhausted. We can talk more tomorrow." But I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I found myself wandering downstairs, muscle memory guiding me through the dark house. The kitchen light was on. David sat at the table, paper spread before him, wearing reading glasses I'd never seen him in before. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, looking up. "Time zones, I lied." We both knew it was more than that. He pushed out a chair at his foot. "Want to see something?" I sat, and he slid a leather-bound book across the table. Dad's handwriting filled the pages. A journal I'd never known he kept. Found this after he died. David said he started it after his diagnosis. I think it was therapy, or maybe practice for conversations he wanted to have, but never figure out how to start. "Have you read it?" "Some. The parts about me feel too private to share, but there's stuff about you that I think you need to see." He flipped to a marked page, dated 8 months ago. Marcus called today. Brief, like always. Asked about the business, about David, about whether I'd fixed the leak in the garage. Didn't ask about my health, but I didn't tell him I'd started chemo again either. We perfected this dance, he and I, circling around everything that matters, never touching, never connecting. I did this. I know I did this. When he enlisted, I took it as a personal rejection. The business was supposed to be our legacy, mine and Sarah's, and our boys were supposed to carry it forward. But Marcus had other dreams, and instead of celebrating his ambition, I mourned my own disappointed expectations. Now he's a stranger who calls dutifully, but never says what he's thinking. Now I'm a father who doesn't know his own son. The cancer's given me clarity. I don't have time to maintain this wall between us, but I don't know how to tear it down either. Every conversation feels like walking through a minefield. One wrong word, and he pulls further away. So I say nothing, and the distance grows, and time keeps slipping through my fingers. I had to stop reading, my vision blurring. I thought he didn't care. "He thought you didn't care," David replied. "Both of you too stubborn to bridge the gap." "Why didn't you tell me he was sick?" David was quiet for a long moment. "He made me promise not to. Said you were deployed in a combat zone, that you needed to focus on staying alive, not worry about him. He said he'd tell you himself when you came home. But I didn't come home. You extended your deployment, and then Dad got sicker, faster than anyone expected. By the time I convinced him to let me contact you, he was in hospice and barely lucid." David's voice cracked. The day before he died, he had one of his clear moments. He grabbed my hand and made me promise to bring you home, to make sure you knew he loved you, that he was proud of you. That was literally the last coherent thing he said. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to hold back tears. I would have come, if I'd known. I know. That's why I pushed so hard to get you here, even for the will reading. Even though I knew it would hurt you, I needed you to come home, so I could keep that promise to Dad. We sat in silence while the refrigerator hummed and the old house settled around us with familiar creaks and groans. Finally, I asked, "What happened with the will?" "The real story." David sighed, flipping to another page in the journal. "Read this. It's from 5 weeks before he died. Revise the will again today. Lawyer thinks I'm losing it. Maybe I am. But I need to make sure David's taken care of. He sacrificed so much. Turned down jobs, opportunities. A chance to move to Seattle with Jennifer before they married. All to stay with me, to build this business. Marcus doesn't need Chun and sons. He has his own life, his own career, his own path. Successful in ways I never was. But David needs a foundation I can provide. The business, the house, the stability. I can give Marcus money. But what he really needs from me can't be written into a will. He needs to know I see him. I see who he's become. I'm proud of the man he is, even if he's nothing like the man I try to force him to be. Funny how clear things become when you're dying. All those years I wasted being angry that my son wanted to serve his country. What father gets angry about that? A fool. A prideful, stubborn fool. That was the third version, David explained. The one that left me to business, but tried to compensate you in other ways. Then came the medication issues. Tell me about that. David pulled out the medical file again, more prepared this time. Dad's cancer had metastasized to his bones, causing severe pain. They put him on high-dose corticosteroids and increased his pain meds. The combination caused what his doctor called steroid psychosis, paranoia, agitation, irrational thinking. He became convinced that people were trying to steal from him, that the business was in danger, that you had abandoned the family and would try to take what wasn't yours. That's why the final will sounds so harsh. Yes, the lawyer noted in his files that Dad seemed more agitated than usual, but he passed the competency tests. So legally, the will stands. But morally, it's a document written by a sick, scared, confused man who wasn't himself. I thought about the last time I'd spoken Dad, 3 weeks before his death, though I hadn't known he was that close to the end. He'd sounded strange on the phone, accusatory, asking if I was ever coming back or if I'd given up on the family entirely. I'd gotten defensive, told him I was serving my country, and if he couldn't understand that, maybe we didn't have anything to talk about. It had been a terrible conversation, and I'd been relieved when it ended. The phone call, I said aloud, 3 weeks before. That was the medications. David nodded. He called me right after, crying, saying he'd ruined everything with you. I told him we'd fix it when you came home, that you'd understand. But he was so deep in the paranoia by then. He kept saying you'd never come back, that he'd lost you forever. God, David. I put my head in my hands. I told him maybe we shouldn't talk for a while. Those were basically my last words to him, that I needed space. He knew you didn't mean it. In his lucid moments, he knew. But had he? Had Dad died thinking I'd given up on him, the same way he'd briefly believed he should give up on me? The thought was unbearable. There's more, David said hesitantly. The house, Dad's tools, his truck. He had plans for all of it that never made it into the final will. What plans? The truck was supposed to be yours. He'd been restoring it with you in mind, keeping all the original parts, even though it would have been easier to replace them. Said you'd appreciate the authenticity. The tools. He wanted them split between us, specific ones for each of us based on what we learned to use as kids. And the house. He wanted it to stay in the family, whoever needed it most. Right now, that's me and Jennifer and the kids. But he talked about it being a gathering place, where both branches of the Chun family could come together, where his grandkids, yours and mine, could play in the same yard we did. I don't have kids. Not yet, but Dad was optimistic. David smiled sadly. He liked to plan ahead. I thought about the rose garden out back, Mom's legacy that someone had been carefully maintaining. Did Dad keep up Mom's roses? Every week, right up until he couldn't anymore. Then I took over. He said it was important, that it was a promise he'd made her. David paused. There's something in the garage you should see. Tomorrow when it's light. But for now, I think we both need to try to sleep. We stood, but I stopped him before he could leave. David, thank you for fighting for this, for making me come home, for not letting Dad's last mistake be his final word. He's not here to make it right, David said, so we do it for him. That's what family does. I climbed the stairs to my old room, Dad's journal tucked under my arm. I spent the next 3 hours reading it cover to cover, discovering the father I'd never really known, the one who worried constantly, who was proud but couldn't express it, who loved fiercely but didn't know how to show it, who died hoping for one more chance to tell his son the truth. As the sun rose over Denver, painted my childhood room in shades of gold and amber, I finally understood. Dad hadn't left me nothing. He'd left me a brother who was willing to fight for what was right, a home I could return to, and through his journal, the truth he'd never been able to speak aloud. It wasn't the inheritance I'd expected, but maybe it was the one I'd needed all along. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon. I found Jennifer in the kitchen, cooking breakfast with practiced efficiency while simultaneously packing lunches for her kids, who were being dropped off by her mother in an hour. She looked up as I entered, her expression warm but cautious. "Coffee's fresh?" she said, gesturing to the pot. "David's in the garage. He's been out there since 6. I poured a cup and headed out the back door. The garage stood separate from the house, a structure Dad had built himself 30 years ago. Inside, I found David standing in front of something covered with a canvas tarp, just staring at it. "That's what I wanted to show you," he said without turning around. I approached, and together we pulled back the tarp. Underneath was Dad's 1967 Ford F-100, the truck he'd bought the year I was born. But it wasn't the truck I remembered. Every inch had been restored. The aqua blue paint gleaming, the chrome bumpers polished to mirrors, the wooden bed rails glowing with fresh varnish. "He finished it 8 months ago," David said. "Spent every spare moment on it for 5 years. Even when he was sick, he'd come out here and work for an hour or two when he had the strength." I ran my hand along the fender, and that's when I saw it, etched into the paint on the tailgate, so subtle you'd miss it if you weren't looking. For Marcus, who needed to drive his own road. Love, Dad. My knees went weak. I had to lean against the workbench to steady myself. He did this for me? Every bolt, every panel, every hour of labor, David confirmed. He documented the whole restoration in a binder. Original parts when possible, period-correct replacements when necessary. He even tracked down the exact radio model that came with the truck in 1967. I opened the driver's door, and the smell hit me. Leather conditioner, oil, and something else I couldn't quite name. Then I realized it was Dad's cologne, Old Spice, the same scent that had clung to his flannel shirts when he'd hugged me as a kid. A air freshener hung from the mirror, still fresh. "He'd sit in here sometimes," David said quietly, "especially near the end. Just sit in the driver's seat and talk to the truck like you were there. I heard him once, through the garage window. He was telling you, about his day, about a job we'd finished, about watching your battalion on the news." On the passenger seat lay the binder David had mentioned, thick with documentation. I flipped it open with trembling hands. Every page was meticulous. Photos of the restoration process, receipts for parts, notes about technique and decision-making. And on the very first page, in Dad's distinctive blocky handwriting, "For Marcus. This is a truck I bought the day you were born. I drove your mother to the hospital in this truck, then drove you home in it 3 days later. You took your first steps holding on to this truck's bumper. You learned to drive in this truck, even though you kept grinding the gears and nearly gave me a heart attack. I want you to have it, son, not because you earned it, but because it's always been yours. Everything I am, everything I built, started the day you came into this world. This truck represents that beginning. May it carry you safely wherever you need to go, just as it carried you home that first day. I love you. I'm proud of you. I'm sorry I didn't say it enough when I had the chance. Dad." I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They came in great, racking sobs that shook my entire body. David's hand landed on my shoulder, and then he was crying too, both of us standing in that garage, grieving the father we'd lost and the words he'd left too late. When we finally composed ourselves, David wiped his eyes and gestured to the workbench. "There's more." He had plans for dividing his tools between us. "See the red tape? That's your set. Blue is mine." He labeled everything. I looked at the pegboard where Dad's tools hung in perfect organization. Red electrical tape marked the hammer I'd use to build my first birdhouse, the level we'd used together on a dozen projects, the socket set he'd bought me when I turned 16. Blue tape marked the tools David had favored. The nail gun, the miter saw, the drafting equipment. He even divided his measuring tapes. I said, almost laughing through the tears, "That's so, Dad." Organized to the end. David agreed, except when the medication scrambled his brain, and he wrote that final will. We spent the next hour going through the garage, discovering all the things Dad had planned to give me. A box of old photos from my childhood, my baseball glove from Little League, professionally restored, a collection of every birthday card and letter I'd ever sent him, carefully preserved in archival sleeves, evidence of a love I'd been blind to, or maybe just too hurt to see. "The attorney needs an answer," David said as we walked back to house, "about how we're going to handle the estate. I meant what I said last night. I want to split things fairly. Keep the business." I said firmly, "You've earned it, and I have no interest in construction. But the house is yours whenever you need it, David interrupted. We'll update the deed to put your name on it too. Equal ownership. Jennifer and I live here, but it's your home. That's not what I was going to say. I stopped walking, forcing him to face me. I was going to say the house should have both our names on it. But not for me, for the grandkids Dad talked about, for keeping the family together. You're sure? I'm sure, but I want the truck, and Dad's tools, and... I hesitated. I want to come home more often. Actually be part of this family instead of just checking in from a distance. David's smile was brighter than the morning sun. Done. All of it. And Mark? We're getting the kids in an hour. They've been asking about their Uncle Marcus for years. Ready to meet your niece and nephew properly? I realized with start that I'd barely interacted with David's kids. Lily, 7, and Marcus Jr., named after me, David had mentioned 5. I'd sent gifts from overseas, called on birthdays, but I'd been absent from their lives the way I'd been absent from Dad's. I'd like that, I said. The morning transformed into afternoon as the house filled with the chaos of children. Lily approached me shyly at first, but warmed up when I showed her my uniform and explained what the different medals meant. Marcus Jr. was less reserved, immediately challenging me to a race around the backyard and declaring me pretty fast for an old guy. Uncle Mark's not old, Lily protested, with a seriousness only a 7-year-old can muster. He's a soldier. Soldiers don't get old. Soldiers definitely get old, I corrected gently. But thank you for the vote of confidence. Over lunch, Jennifer's famous lasagna, apparently. The kids peppered me with questions. What was it like in the desert? Had I ever seen a camel? Did I have a gun? Yes, but we don't talk about that at the lunch table, David interjected. Had I met the president? Could I teach them to march like soldiers? Their innocent curiosity was healing in a way I hadn't expected. They saw my service as something exciting and honorable, with none of the complications that had colored Dad's view of it. To them, I was just Uncle Marcus, who lived far away but was pretty cool when he visited. After lunch, David pulled out more boxes from the attic. Years of family history I'd missed. Photos from Lily's birth, Marcus Jr.'s first steps, school plays and soccer games and birthday parties. A whole family album I'd been absent from, but clearly included in almost every set of photos. There was at least one picture of me from my official military portraits that David must have printed from the files I'd sent him. We always talked about you, Jennifer explained. The kids grew up knowing they had an Uncle Marcus who was serving overseas, protecting people. You were never forgotten, even when you weren't here. That evening, Dave and I sat on the back porch while the kids played in the yard, and Jennifer prepared dinner. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and for the first time in years, I felt something like peace. I've been thinking, David said, breaking the comfortable silence, about what to do with Dad's company. You don't need to do anything. Hear me out, he interrupted. The company is worth about $2 million. Equipment, contracts, property, everything. According to the will, it's all mine. But that's not right. David, let me finish. I'm going to have the company reappraised. Then we're going to establish a fair market value. You'll get half that value. But not in cash. We don't have that kind of liquidity. Instead, I'm proposing we set up a trust. You'll be a silent partner, receiving a percentage of profits annually. When I eventually sell or retire, you'll get your half then. I can't accept. You can and you will, David said firmly, because it's fair, because Dad would want it, because I want it, because you're my brother, and we're done with this distance between us. I wanted to argue, but the truth was David was right. It was fair. More than fair. It was love expressed through action, through the difficult work of making things right even when the law said they didn't have to be. Okay, I agreed, but only if you promise to actually use me as a resource. I know people in military procurement. I can help with contracts. Even deployed, I can make calls, send emails, network. Let me contribute something. Deal, David said, extending his hand. We shook on it, and the gesture felt like closing one chapter, while opening another. That night, after the kids were in bed and Jennifer had retired to their room, David and I stayed up late in the garage, going through Dad's things. We found more treasures. A box of Mom's recipes in her handwriting, Dad's old dog tags from his brief stint in the National Guard, a photo album from their wedding day. And we found one more journal. This one started just a week before Dad died. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible, but the message was clear. My boys, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I hope Marcus made it home. I hope David told him everything I should have said myself. I hope they're together, figuring out how to be brothers again. I wasn't perfect. I made mistakes, so many mistakes. I let pride and stubbornness keep me from my son. I let fear of loss keep me from expressing love. But you boys, you're better than me. Smarter, kinder. You'll figure out what I couldn't. You'll be the family I tried to build, but didn't quite know how to maintain. David, take care of your brother. Marcus, come home sometimes. Both of you, remember that family isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, trying again, forgiving the failures, and moving forward together. I love you both. I'm proud of you both. Don't let my death be the thing that brings you together. Let it be the beginning of something better. We read it together in the quiet of the garage, surrounded by tools and memories in the truck that represented everything Dad had wanted to say but couldn't. When we finished, we didn't need to speak. We understood. The next morning, I called my commanding officer and requested to extend my leave by another week. I wanted more time with David's family. I wanted to help go through Dad's affairs properly. I wanted to learn to be an uncle, a brother, a son to a father's memory instead of a father's disappointment. The remaining days passed in a blur of activity. We met with attorneys to restructure the estate. We went through Dad's belongings, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to preserve for David's kids. We took the truck out for a drive, and I felt Dad's presence in every turn of the wheel, every rumble of the engine he'd so carefully restored. We also went to Dad's grave for the first time since a funeral I'd missed. It was in a cemetery on the outskirts of Denver, next to Mom's plot. The headstone was simple: Harold James Chun, 1948 to 2025. Beloved husband, father, friend. He built things that lasted. I stood there for a long time, one hand on the cold granite, and finally said the words I should have said years ago. I love you, Dad. I'm sorry I wasn't here. I'm sorry we wasted so much time. But I'm here now. I'm going to do better. I'm going to be the son you deserved, even if you're not here to see it. I'm going to take care of David. I'm going to know my niece and nephew. I'm going to come home. I promise. David stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, and together we mourned and healed and began the work of rebuilding what we'd almost lost. The night before I had to return to base, we had a family dinner, the kind Mom used to make, with too much food and too much laughter and everyone talking over each other. Lily insisted I sit next to her so she could show me her drawings. Marcus Jr. wanted to arm wrestle, which I let him win. Jennifer kept refilling my plate. David made a toast to Dad, to family, to new beginnings. As I drove away the next morning, the truck loaded with boxes of Dad's things and my heart full in a way it hadn't been in years, I glanced in the rearview mirror. David stood in the driveway with his family, all of them waving. My family, our family. I come home expecting nothing and found everything that mattered. Dad's would try to divide us, but his love, expressed through a restored truck, a brother's integrity, and a family that refused to let go, had brought us back together. The inheritance I'd received wasn't measured in dollars or property. It was measured in second chances, in relationships restored, in the understanding that family isn't about perfection. It's about showing up again and again, no matter how hard it gets. As Denver disappeared in my mirrors and the road stretched out before me, I made a silent promise to Dad, to David, to myself. I'd be back, not in months or years, but soon, because I finally understood what I'd been searching for in deserts and mountains halfway around the world. Home, family, belonging. They'd been waiting for me all along.